Genesis chapter 39 is where we're going to pick up tonight in the story of Genesis. Phil kind of left us hanging, but we decided that we could keep this going. If you listened in two Sunday nights ago, 2 weeks ago, on Phil's message in chapter 38, I'm really glad that I didn't get that one. If you ever thought that, Phil was the kind of guy that picked and chose his topics, he blew that out of the water there. No one wants to pick that one, right? But it's here, and it's here for a reason. And did a good job explaining that, and we don't need to review. But 38 is kind of in the middle of this story of Joseph and everything going on, and then chapter 38 happens, and then chapter 39 we kind of pick right back up with Joseph. And the story of Joseph up until this point was he was his daddy's favorite. He had the coat of many colors to prove it. His brothers were jealous. They took him out. They wanted to kill him. Reuben said, no, don't kill him. So they didn't kill him. But they made it look like he had been killed. They sold him to some people into slavery. And the Ishmaelites were going to carry him down into Egypt. And that's where we will pick up in verse 39. And we will, or chapter 39. And we'll read and just kind of talk about it as we go through. Like I said, this morning, this was Mike's message. He had it all prepared and ready to go. And I called him this afternoon. And I said, how do you feel? He said, I feel horrible. I said, well, you're going to have to get better, buddy. And he said, I got up, I did some dishes, I thought I was feeling better. He's like, I'm just tired, He's like, So I said, well, don't worry about it. I said, I won't do as good as you had planned, but I'll muddle my way through. So, verse number 1, and Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So we see Joseph getting carried out from his brothers, getting carried into slavery, a very bad situation. Once again, when you get down into the details of this story, not a good thing, right? Can't imagine being sold, can't imagine being sold by your family, being mistreated, getting cast out in this way. But it says that the Lord was with Joseph. Throughout this entire time, throughout all of these things that were going on, throughout confusion, throughout how in the world is this happening to me? I was just doing what Dad told me to do. I was just being a good son. I was trying to help my brothers out, which maybe he was a little, haughty, I don't know. But in the midst of doing these things, how did I end up here? But verse 3 says, his master saw that the Lord was with him. And I think that is a big thing for us today to pull away from this, right? So in Egypt, they believed, everything was a god, basically, right? They had a lot of different gods. And Joseph was so faithful and so trusting and so reliant on the Lord that this Egyptian who believed in all these things saw God in him. In the chaos of life, this slave kid, he's not, he's in his late teens, early 20s, somewhere around there. I should know that, but I'm guessing like 20. This slave kid is so possessed by what the Lord would have for him to do, so led by God, that this Egyptian that's got a huge house, an important guy in the kingdom, sees that God is with him. When we go out and we live our day-to-day life, can people say the same about us? That the Lord is with us and that the Lord prospers the things that we do because we are willing to do the work, right? Joseph was willing to put in that work. Verse 4, and Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had, he put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. So we see Joseph continuing to do what he's supposed to be doing, blessing this man, Potiphar, by the hard work that he does, and God blessing Potiphar on behalf of Joseph. Because of Joseph's willingness to do what he should do, Potiphar is receiving the blessing from this as well. And it came to pass from the time that he'd made him overseer. Oh, wait, I already read that, didn't I? Verse 6, and he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. So this guy, Potiphar, had first world problems, right? You know, those kind of problems that really aren't problems. Potiphar's biggest problem was he didn't have to worry about anything. He didn't even know what he had. Joseph was doing such a great job in controlling his house and making sure that he was prosperous and making sure that everything was running efficiently. Everything was so good, all Potiphar had to do was pick out which loaf of bread he wanted to eat. So Potiphar's doing good here. Things are working out because of Joseph's willingness to follow the Lord. Verse 7, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath in mine hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept anything back from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So we see the ill intent of Potiphar's wife. Whatever the case may be, why she's making this decision. Is it something that she is desiring the power? I mean, it says that Joseph was a good-looking kid. He was pretty, fun to be around. The Lord was, blessed him. He had a lot of, I'm sure everyone looked up to him. Everyone could tell that he was a man of great importance in the house. Granted, he was just a slave, but he was in control of everything that Potiphar had, except for his wife. And she makes this decision that she wants Joseph. She wants to be with Joseph. So she makes a attempt at getting him to be involved in a sexual relationship that isn't appropriate. It's not God's way. God is very clear in the Bible about sexual relationships being between a man and his wife. And that anything outside of that is not appropriate. And, that's an unpopular conversation to have in society today, because society in general thinks that that's ignorance, that that's madness. But God has a plan. And his plan, a lot of times we take for granted and we think that, his plan is just to kill our joy or to take, the fun out of life. But God knows that relationships like this, especially when, it's in a situation like this, it does nothing to help anybody. It makes everything worse. It makes relationships worse. It's not good. And so he has a plan, and Joseph says, look, no, this is not good. And this was a big temptation for Joseph, right? He's a young kid. He's a good-looking guy. He's got a lot of authority in the house. He's got power, and he's got every opportunity. And the chances are people aren't going to find out. She's not going to want to tell her husband. He's not going to want her husband to find out. The husband, might ignore because he's getting. So Joseph is in a tough position here. But notice what he says. He doesn't say, "I don't want to sin against you." He says, "I don't want to sin against God." Right? And we throughout the Bible, there are men that have, bad decisions when it comes to extramarital affairs and those kind of things. We think of David and his sin with Bathsheba and his acknowledgement ultimately that my sin was against you, God. And while it is bad for Joseph, relationally within the house, he looks bad to all his co-workers and to Potiphar's wife and to Potiphar and anybody else who would ever find out about it. Joseph's true motivation here was that he didn't want to sin against God. And a lot of times, we try to rationalize decisions we make that, it's not going to hurt anything, or no one's going to find out about it, or it's not that big a deal in the big scheme. It could be a lot worse. Did you see what such and such did? Did you hear how that happened? I don't do anything near like that guy. And we can rationalize things, but ultimately, sin damages our relationship with God. And it takes us away from the closeness that we seek with him. And then in turn, it takes us down a path away from what he would have for us to do. And Joseph acknowledges this. He says, listen, I can't. Your husband trusts me. Your husband has put me into this position of power. I am important in this house. And quite frankly, I don't want to sin against God. That's not what he would have for me to do. In verse 10, and it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day. So this wasn't a one-time occurrence. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't her drinking too much wine and, saying something. This was day by day. She was seeking to trap Joseph and seeking to put him in a bad way. Day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. So not only would he not consent to a sexual relationship, he's like, I can't even be with you. I don't want to be in the same room as you. And there's wisdom in that, right? We all know what sin often besets us, right? We all have something that is, a thorn in our flesh. We all know what those triggers are. We all know the things that individually affect us the most in our life, cause us to make decisions that take us away from God, whatever that might be. And we could go down a list of sins, but nobody wants us to do that. We all know what it is, right? We all know that thing that is our weakness. And Joseph said, you know what? I'm not even going to be in the same room as you. I'm going to stay away from you. And that would be wise for us as well, to stay away from those things that affect us, those sins that often beset us. So Joseph says he's not going to lie with her, he's not going to be with her. Verse 11, and it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. This is where the music in the background goes, dun, dun, dun. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. So, going about his everyday business, right? He's doing what God would have for him to do. He's staying true to his master. He's staying true to his God. He's working hard. He's getting stuff done. And she is bugging him to death, day by day, tempting him, trying to pull him away from what he should be doing into an inappropriate relationship. And he gets to the point where he's ignoring her. Well, the one day he goes to work, and I think there's probably a pretty good chance that she got rid of all the people that were working that day. Maybe she put them out, sent them all out to plow the yard or something. And there was no men in the house when he came in. And I think, obviously, he didn't know that was the case. And she caught him by his garment. So she grabbed a hold of his coat when he come in, and she said, lie with me. Now, the implication here isn't a request. The implication here is kind of turned more towards the, hey, slave, come here. And she's trying to, once again, take advantage of the situation that Joseph's in. But Joseph, not to be outdone, takes off running. He leaves his garment behind in her hand, and he fled and got out, right? And we think of, in the New Testament when Paul says, or James, resist Satan, and we say flee from all appearances of evil. So all of these writers and all these people, this is what they're thinking about, right? This is the story that's coming up into their mind when they're saying resist Satan, flee from Satan, get away from Satan, run. They're thinking of Joseph in the master's house with the rich lady, everything he ever wanted, and she's trying to grab a hold of his coat, and he gets out of there as quickly as possible. He doesn't care that she has a hold of his coat. He doesn't care what's going on. This is not right. I'm getting out of here. And in our society, and human beings in general throughout all societies, but we can relate it to ours specifically. It's difficult sometimes to do the right thing just because it's the right thing, right? Society would tell us to do the right thing as long as it's helpful, as long as you want to, as long as it's convenient. Not because it's right, but if you can get away with something, go ahead and get away with it, you know? And Joseph doesn't want to do that. He's doing the right thing because it's the right thing. He doesn't care what happens after that. He doesn't care what's going to happen to his reputation. He knows that she's no good. He knows that she's not going to, deal with him fairly in this. But he's doing what the Lord would have for him to do. He's ignoring the cares of this world, the lusts that he has potentially in his heart. He's resisting all of that so that he can stay true to God and what he should be doing. Verse 13, and it came to pass when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto men of her house, and spake unto them, saying, see, he hath brought in an Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. So she doesn't get her way, and she gets mad about it, right? And then what does she do? Kind of sounds familiar, right? And Adam said, what this woman you gave me, look what she made me do. Look what she did. She's like, you see what Potiphar did, guys? He brought this Hebrew in. Hebrews. Brought this Hebrew in to mock us, to take over the house, to do something that he shouldn't be doing. And look, he tried to have an inappropriate relationship with me. He tried to come in and take me for his own. Luckily, I yelled, and I had a hold of his coat to try to fight him off. She's obviously very deceitful in this. Verse 15, it came to pass when he heard that, I lifted up in my voice and cried that he left the garment with me and fled and got him out, and she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. So she's laying there on the bed. She just lied to everybody in the house, and she's like, I'm just going to take this coat and just lay it right here next to me so that when Potiphar comes home, I can give him the story too. Evil, right? Now, it doesn't really say in here, but I wonder what Joseph is doing in this situation. Because there's a period of time here. What was Joseph? I mean, probably would have been difficult to run, but I believe I might have tried it. I believe I might have said, you know what? When Potiphar gets home, I'm guessing this is not going to go well for me. But he doesn't do that. And obviously I'm reading into all of it at this point because God doesn't tell us in the Bible. But I think probably he made that decision to stay because he knew he wasn't doing anything wrong. And he knew that this was where God had him, doing what God had him doing, and that he wasn't going to run because, just because Potiphar's wife had sought evil for him. I don't know. That's why I said that's all conjecture. I mean, that's just kind of reading in. But we see the character of Joseph, no doubt, either way. He's willing to stand and do what's right and be right because that's what God would have for him to do, because it's the right thing. Not because of the political pressures, not because of what's going on in the house, not because of what someone thinks he should do. He's doing right because that's what's right. That's what God laid forward for him. Verse number 19, and it came to pass when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So once again, we see Potiphar's husband, or Potiphar, not Potiphar's husband, Potiphar's wife and Potiphar. Potiphar coming home, finding out what had happened, and he's upset. He's ticked off. His wrath is kindled. Now, I believe he probably, by all rights, could have just got rid of Joseph, right? Made him disappear, killed him, whatever. But he probably appreciated Joseph and the work that he had done. So the decision is made. He's locked up and he's put into prison. And once again, when you look at this life in a small little piece, you see not good going on in Joseph's life. Once again, minding his own business, doing what God would have for him to do, being the kind of man that God would want for him to be, resisting the devil, resisting temptation, ignoring the call of this woman, and he just doing what's right. And the poor guy can't catch a break. Now he's getting thrown in jail for doing the right thing. You know, we have a message today in a lot of places of how that, all you got to do is name and claim it, and that God, wants the best for you, and that everything's going to work out for you. And God does promise that all things work together for good. But look at Joseph's life and look at all the individuals' life throughout the Bible. You can pick out a lot of things that aren't going right for them by what we call right. But once again, our right and God's right are oftentimes different. And Joseph is focusing on God's right, not his own right. He wants to do what God says is right. He wants to follow the Lord's plan. So he's in prison, seemingly getting worse by the moment. He everywhere he ends up, he betters himself. And as he's in prison, it doesn't take long for them to figure out that he is, blessed of the Lord and that things go well for him. And so his master took him and they put him in the prison. And as he was in prison, it says, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So he's moving up even within the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. So once again, Joseph's prospering in prison. He's getting authority over all the other inmates. He's doing all the things that need to be done. He's very smart. He's very influential. He probably is very political, has good conversation with everybody, can, talk to this guy and talk to this guy and make sure all the prison fights stay, to a minimum. And he's very good at what he does. He's blessed by the Lord. And, throughout all of these things, I wonder how many times did he go, why am I doing this? Why am I staying faithful to a God that is putting me in these situations continually? Why? My brothers hate me so much. They wanted to kill me, but instead of killing me, they sell me as a slave. God blesses that. I get to a rich guy's house. I take over. And then, once again, God turns his back on me, has me thrown in prison here. How many times did Joseph just think, man, like Job's wife said, curse God and die, right? But Joseph doesn't do that. And honestly, I don't know why he doesn't. I mean, it's kind of like what we talked about earlier, right? It's about personal relationship with God. I think that Joseph continued to stay on the path of doing what God had for him to do because he loved God. Because he was in relationship with the Lord. He sought that relationship. And he knew that as he was going through this life, even though the circumstances that he was facing wasn't what he wanted them to be, they were necessary for whatever was coming. And it's difficult to have that kind of outlook. It's difficult to see the circumstances of life, especially when they're not what we want them to be, to see them as bad and to think that, God doesn't care and that God's distant and that, all this stuff is happening, and we have no control of it. And it's easy to get discouraged in that. But when you step back and you look at our lives and you look at the lives of those that we're talking about, God's hand is in all of it. And we know that ultimately, spoiler alert, sorry, Mike, Joseph gets over the entire country of Egypt except for Pharaoh, right? He becomes a very important person. He saves humanity as they knew it from death and starvation because of his wisdom and his relationship with the Lord. But if he would have given in to Potiphar's wife, would things have still turned out the way they did? I don't know. Maybe. God can redeem him, right? But maybe not. Maybe that sends him down a totally different path and his story isn't even recorded for us. I don't know. What if he would have been discouraged when he was sold into slavery? What if he would have, when he went to jail, said, you know what, I'm tired of it. I'm just done. Whatever, I'm out. Sorry, God. I'm not doing anything else. I'm going to start being the bad guy that they want me to be. But he didn't. He persevered. He kept going with what the Lord would have for him to do because he knew that God had the best for him. Even if it was something that he didn't enjoy in the comfort of that moment, he knew there was a purpose for it and he wanted to follow the Lord. Verse 23, the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it prosper. Got to the point where the keeper of the prison didn't even pay attention to him. Do what you got to do. I trust you. Joseph keeps building this trust everywhere he goes because the hand of the Lord was on him. And I truly believe that the hand of the Lord is on us. And I know that the hand of the Lord is on me. I look back throughout my life and I see a lot of places where things could have happened differently. And I thank the Lord that He was there with me and He kept me, in a good place and in a good family and a good church, and I had all you around me to help me and to build into my life and teach me when I was little and all the way up until continually teaching me now. It's when you step back, when you look at the circumstances, they can be confusing and infuriating, but when you step back and you're willing to see what God has done, He has a plan for you. He has a plan for all of us. He has a plan for the church. He has a plan for everything that we have going on. We might not see it. We might not trust it yet, but we can have faith that He does have a plan and that He will see it through if we are willing to keep walking that path that He's set us on. You think Mike would have done better? You don't have to answer that. All right. Well, that's all I got for you tonight. So as we go home, be thinking of this story of Joseph and how that it can relate to your life and to know that even when circumstances seemingly are bad, that God is still in it. Let's pray. Dear Father, Lord, I thank You for this day. I thank You for this time. I thank You for the opportunity to open Your word and to see from the godly men whose stories were recorded that You have preserved for us for all this time so that we can see what it looks like to be a person of God, to be somebody that follows You no matter what the circumstances of our life, especially when the circumstances seemingly are bad or seemingly confusing or we don't have an answer for or we don't see how You could be in it, Lord, to know that You are in control. And that You do have a plan, and that You are going to stay with us, and You are going to be with us and to bless us, Lord. Just pray that You keep us safe throughout the week, Lord. Just pray that You would help us to seek the opportunities that You open the doors for, that we would tell others about You, Lord, and bring more people to Your house and lead people to hear the gospel, Lord. We love You and we thank You for all You've given us. We ask all these things in Your name. Amen.